Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode. It is time to get right into it right after this. All right, guys. So as many of you know, I am a hardcore, true blue law enforcement supporter. I'm a law enforcement spouse, and we love good cops, and we love showcasing them and highlighting them and sharing their stories. And today is no different. So my guest today is Greg Dillon, and he has written a very compelling book. It's called The Thin Blue Lie, An Honest Cop versus the FBI. And it looks pretty amazing. I'm really excited to read this book, but the only thing I'm more excited about is to talk to the author himself. So here he is. Hello, Greg. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you, Elsa. How about you?
I'm very good. So thank you so much for coming on the show and being willing to talk to me about your book and your whole story. It is really intriguing. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I found you on CAPA, which is for anybody who doesn't know, it's the Connecticut Authors and Publishers Association. And as soon as I saw the book cover, that's what got me. As soon as I saw the book cover, as a law enforcement spouse, I looked at it and I did a double take. And then I said, oh my God, I need him on the show. And then I kind of cyber stalked you and just harassed you to come on the show. And you're like, okay, sure.
Happy to do so.
Wonderful. So your book is called The Thin Blue Lie. It is a good cop versus the FBI. So that right there is a showstopper, because going up against the FBI is a pretty big deal. So before we even get into that, tell me a little bit about your background, how you got into policing, and where that journey actually took you.
Sure. At a very early age, I was intrigued by the idea of having a career in law enforcement, and sort of focused on the goal of becoming an FBI agent eventually. So I did my homework and my research and determined that I would need a four-year college degree. So I attended the University of New Haven for a criminal justice major. And I also knew I had to have 3 years of experience in my chosen major. So I decided, I was working as a courtroom sheriff in New Haven at the time, and but I wanted the experience of actual law enforcement. So I applied to the Branford Police Department. I was initially hired as a part-time officer right out of college. And within 3 years, I was hired full-time. After a few years as a police officer, I began to apply to the FBI. And by, let's see, so I graduated in 1978, 1981, I was a full-time officer. And by 1985, I was going through the testing process to become a special agent. I entered the FBI Academy at the end of 1985. And my first office was the Alexandria field office in Virginia, very close to Washington, D.C. And in fact, so close to Washington, D.C. that headquarters decided to merge our offices together. So I went from a relatively small 60 agent office to a massive 600 plus agent office in Washington, D.C. I'd been working in the criminal reactive squad in Virginia. I was assigned to the violent crime squad in Washington, D.C. Very, very busy at the time. It was the murder capital of the country per capita. And primarily bank robberies, but everything from kidnappings to armored car robberies to extortions, any homicides or attempted homicides on federal property, and on the SWAT team. So a very, very busy, very challenging environment. I also wanted to get back to Connecticut, and for various reasons that I describe in the book, my only option realistically was to leave the FBI and take a position in Connecticut in law enforcement. So I applied and was accepted as an inspector in the Chief State Attorney's Office in Connecticut. As you probably well know, some people may not know, The Attorney General's office is strictly civil. The Chief State Attorney's office is criminal. Other states, the Attorney General is sort of the default go-to, but they bifurcate them in Connecticut. So I was still doing criminal investigations. It was just as a state officer and not as a federal agent.
Wow. That's quite a shift. All of the shifts are pretty major shifts, each very intriguing and fascinating all on their own. But to make those changes like that, were they difficult transitions, or was it just natural for you to go, from one thing and then to go into SWAT is, pretty intense in itself?
Well, I was fortunate enough to be on the special response team in Branford. So that was sort of a nice, like, minor leagues kind of an experience. When I went to the Alexandria office, it was a smaller office. I was on that SWAT team. But again, you're talking like a 12-man team as opposed to going to the Washington Field office, which was like a 50-man team. So that was kind of like going from the minor leagues, I guess, to the major leagues. So the transitions, while they were different, they were sort of gradual transitions. They weren't big jumps from one to another. Everything just was sort of a stepping stone. And when I went to the state, the work was FBI similar, not identical, but the Chief State Attorney's Office has authority over any criminal investigation in the entire state of Connecticut. So we did have wide-ranging territory and authority. So I felt well prepared for that position based on my training and experience with the FBI.
Is there like a high burnout, just out of curiosity, is there like a high burnout rate for such intense fields like SWAT or anything? Is there, are they short duration, or are there people that go into it and that's their whole career? What do you find more with that, just out of curiosity?
Most of the agents will find a way to transition out to something less dynamic, less unpredictable. There are a lot of call-outs. I mean, for a single guy at the time, I was good with it. If back then, we had pagers. So, if your pager went off at 11 o'clock at night, you could deal with it. If you were waking up your wife and children in the middle of the night and then coming back at 9 o'clock in the morning and going to bed, a little more disruptive to the family. And when you're younger, I think it's it's a little more exciting. You're a little more resilient. As you get older, getting a call out on a weekend or early morning takes a toll. So by and large, there were a couple of old timers on the I'll call them veteran agents on the squad. By and large, they were mostly newer agents, or at least agents maybe into their 30s. By the time they were getting to their 40s, they would try to find another assignment that was a little more traditional, daytime, weekends off, that type of a thing. So
that makes sense.
There was a bit of a burnout on the squad, but more opportunities that would present themselves as you had more experience, that type of thing.
Now, one of the things that you got involved in was the Federal Fugitive Task Force. Did I say that right? Federal Fugitive Thank you. Could you tell me a little bit about that? What was that like?
Yeah, so ironically, within a couple of years of working at the Chief State Attorney's Office, the office decided they wanted to form their own fugitive squad. For those who don't know it, inspectors' assignments are you have to be eligible by having, I forget now because I've been retired for a number of years. I think you have to have at least 6 years of law enforcement experience and 3 as a dedicated investigator. So it sort of narrows down the applicant pool of people that can even apply for the inspector's job. So a long way of saying that most of my colleagues were already well into their 40s or 50s, some actually in their 60s. I think I was the youngest inspector at the time. I was still in my early 30s. So when the position became available, I think there were 2 openings. I was the hands down favorite, as I was the only inspector in the entire Division of Criminal Justice to apply for the spot. So I had the #1 and the #2 position at the same time, because no one else thought it was a desirable assignment. So I was a squad of 1 for a short amount of time. And then they opened up the hiring to the outside, and a second inspector was added. At about that time, the FBI extended an invitation to the 2 of us to join their fugitive task force, which was comprised of several FBI agents, several state troopers, and a handful of detectives, usually from the bigger cities, New Haven, Bridgeport, and eventually we ended up with a detective from Hartford also.
Wow, that, I mean, just just the career alone and the experience they've had are so incredible. And now, how did this whole FBI, and I know I don't want to, I'm not going to ask you too much. I don't want you to give away the whole book, of course, but how on earth and why did you go up against the FBI?
Well, they left me no choice. And without getting into the weeds of the warrant situation, as briefly as I can describe it, everyone was responsible for bringing in their own cases. And we were referred cases, when I say we, the inspectors, of usually violent felons that had failed to appear in court. So they had made bond and were out on this bond, and then would fail to appear on the charges, which were usually very serious felony offenses, most often violent felony offenses. We would get the referrals from different states' attorneys' offices and also from the probation departments. The probation officers were not allowed to carry firearms, so that was an extra hazardous duty for them to try to go out and locate and apprehend their absconders. So we were sort of the clearinghouse for a lot of the higher profile probation violators. We had state warrants, and we had the authority through the state's attorney's office to extradite them anywhere within the United States. The FBI, in order to become involved, needed a federal warrant. This allowed them, this provided them the nexus to become officially involved. So they would then turn around and apply for what is called an unlawful flight to avoid prosecution warrant. It was abbreviated to UFAP, UFAP. And all they had to show or demonstrate was the probable cause that the fugitive had actually left the state of Connecticut in order to avoid apprehension. So it was sort of a 2-stage process. We didn't need the federal warrant to go out and locate them and arrest them. They needed the federal warrant to justify their involvement. And it was understood this was the arrangement. The problem became when some of the federal warrants were refused for insufficient probable cause. The U.S. Attorney's Office was not convinced that they had fled the state of Connecticut and were outside the state of Connecticut in order to avoid apprehension. Unfortunately, the coordinator took offense to this position, and because of the fact that the UFAP warrants were never prosecuted federally, they were always dropped as soon as the fugitive was arrested, he decided that they could now falsify the affidavit, justifying it in his mind that they were not going to be prosecuted on a federal warrant. The problem became that in an effort to enhance the probable cause, they made up information and attributed the false information to either me or 2 of the inspectors that were assigned to my squad. By that point, we had hired an additional 5 inspectors. So now I was a supervisor of 5 inspectors and myself for 6. And it came to my attention inadvertently that the agents were attributing false information and using us as the sources because they were counting on the fact that we weren't going to see the federal warrants. And they felt, I guess, pretty safe doing something something that reckless and dangerous and illegal. Let's be honest, illegal. When I came across it, it was a dilemma because now I was going to be put in a position of accusing colleagues of misconduct. I decided I needed proof positive before I did something that serious. And I went back and retrieved some old files, confirmed my suspicions. Two of the inspectors corroborated my suspicions by reviewing some of their files. At the point where we found 7 different federal affidavits that had been falsified using the inspectors as the false information source, I had no choice but to report it to the chief state's attorney to protect not only our reputations, but the integrity of our office.
Were the other investigators right on board with that, or were they hesitant? I'm not sure if you can say, but were they?
No, I can say,
Yeah.
no, they were incensed that their names had been used behind their backs on falsified affidavits, and they were very willing to go forward with me when we filed our complaint with the chief state's attorney.
So that's important too, because you know, if you're alone on this iceberg, being the only one standing up and saying something's not right here, and you have no backup, that's makes
well,
everything.
Ultimately, I was the sole survivor, unfortunately, when it got a little more involved and a little uglier by way of the federal lawsuit.
And it got ugly.
Yeah, they got ugly, and I understand why the other 2 were reluctant to become involved. Both of them were married with children, worried about college costs and you know, their career. I was worried also. I didn't have the burden of worrying about any children, so I guess could be a little bolder, maybe, or a little more steadfast in my commitment to see it through.
Sure. And you obviously, your complaint was met with a lot of resistance. Was that right from the get-go, right from the people that you're reporting to, that this was an issue? What was the chain of that?
Yes. So, I mean, and that's a great question, because initially, I wouldn't say it was well received, but the chief state attorney's ire was directed at the FBI initially. What I did not realize, nor did the other inspectors, was at that same time, Chief State's Attorney Bailey was trying to put himself in a position to, I guess, a career move. He wanted ultimately to be working at the U.S. level, of the federal level, in the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. Janet Reno at the time was the Department of Justice Attorney General. He was vying for a top level position with the Department of Justice, unbeknownst to any of us. And unfortunately, it changed his position, in that now he did not want to alienate the FBI. He did not want to embarrass the U.S. Attorney's Office, and his ire was then redirected to us, ordering us not to discuss our findings with anyone, ordering us not to mention it to anyone, under threat of termination. We were removed from the task force, naturally, and that was not unexpected. In fact, it was welcome, because there was a distrust now between us and the FBI. But we continued to do fugitive work in quite successfully. There were still 6 of us, and we were very, very successful for a number of months in locating and arresting fugitives in state and out of state. Even without the FBI's involvement, we were still able to send out leads across the country and have people arrested. The chief state's attorney was getting a lot of pushback, obviously, from the FBI. They were unhappy that we were a rival fugitive group. And ultimately, they, I guess, twisted his arm to the point where he decided to disband us under the pretense of lack of funding, which we all recognized was nonsense, but he needed an excuse. Because we were so good at our job, he could not use that as the reason. So it became a funding issue. We were ultimately disbanded. I was no longer a supervisor, and we were all transferred to different courthouses across the state. I saw this as retaliatory. When I eventually came back to the chief state's attorney's office, I found that I was no longer a supervisor. And again, it confirmed my suspicion that this was retaliation. Between that and being ordered in writing not to discuss our findings with anyone, I decided to seek legal counsel, and that is when we filed a federal civil rights lawsuit in federal court for a violation of the right to free speech.
Wow. Were there people in your field that were saying to you, knowing of what you were about to do, were they trying to advise you against it, or because that's a big deal?
Yes and yes. Okay, so there was the camp that felt like this was career suicide, and that I was going to be going up against not only the chief state's attorney's office, but the Connecticut Attorney General's office at the time, headed by Richard Blumenthal, because they provide the legal defense on any state lawsuits. In addition to the FBI legal team and the U.S. Attorney's legal team, and also the Department of Justice, because they oversee both. There was the other camp that said to me, you are doing the right thing, and encouraged me to continue to do the right thing because of the fact that it was the right thing. I was telling the truth. I had the evidence that supported my story. I had the two inspectors that supported our story. And I came to a fork in the road, and I wasn't happy with either path, to be honest with you. But in my heart, I knew what I really had to do, because one's reputation in law enforcement hinges upon your integrity and your credibility. And I just felt I was left no other option but to see this through to its conclusion, and I did.
And that was quite a process. How long from the time that the charges were filed, I'm not sure if that's the right terminology, to its conclusion, how long was that whole process from the time that you brought your case up?
Relatively short in court years. So oftentimes, as you well know, when things get into court, they grind their way at a glacier-like pace, and it becomes very discouraging, and it becomes very expensive. And my attorney was savvy enough to file an injunctive relief, which, once she explained it to me, means that we sort of asked to jump to the head of the line, because it is an ongoing, crisis, maybe a strong word. It's an ongoing scenario, right? So oftentimes when you file a civil action, say it was a car accident, or it happened, and nothing really is going to change the fact that it happened. In this particular instance, this was ongoing. We were under a gag order not to discuss the misconduct, and the gag order had never been relieved or removed. So based on that, my attorney, cleverly made the claim that this was an ongoing violation of civil rights, and therefore the injunctive relief requested the court speed up the litigation process, which it did happen relatively quickly, within a matter of months instead of years.
Wow, that's incredible. Now, forgive my lack of knowledge on this. Did you have the support of like a union behind you, or were you really on your own? Was this a personal suit, or like, how does that work?
Yeah. Again, yes and no.
Okay.
We have a union. We had a union. I don't think the union was very excited about getting involved in this. It only really affected a small number of members of the union. So it was not sort of a collective issue where, let's say, they're going to, restrict compensatory time or change something in the contract where that affects everyone as a group. This was a very isolated issue. And I'm not sure they quite ever grasped the severity of it, at least initially. So they took a rather, I thought, a timid approach to it. I didn't think it was a very vigorous defense of us. That changed as time went on, but initially it was a tepid response, in my opinion.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like everybody just wanted this whole thing to just go away so they didn't have to deal with it. Is that a fair assessment?
No, it was an ugly issue. It made everyone uncomfortable.
Sure.
And I'm sure everyone, except for those most affected, would have been very happy to see this thing disappear. Unfortunately, for me and Steve Kumnick and Steve Fredo, it was a very personal issue. And the other inspectors felt strongly about it, even though they weren't directly involved. They were certainly indirectly involved because they were removed from assignments that they enjoyed and were good at. So it affected 6 people very directly, and then indirectly the families, those inspectors also. So it was very important to us, maybe not to everyone else.
Sure. And just for the record, I'm completely on your side with all of that. There's nothing that a good cop and a family of good cops hate more than anything else. It's bad cops and in any field. So, so
Perfectly
grateful.
put.
Yeah.
Yes,
So grateful.
I've said that plenty of times. No one hates a bad cop worse than a good cop.
Yes.
It makes their job so much more difficult.
Absolutely. And, and every time one poorly represents the badge, it reflects everyone, unfortunately. And it shouldn't be that way, but it is that way. I mean, we're all realists here, and we know that that's the case, that, when one does wrong, society believes that they all do wrong. So,
Yes.
It's a great sight when people like yourself step up and, despite consequence and the reactions from others, you still go and do the right thing. So thank you for doing that. That's huge, because it's obviously a huge personal consequence that they were. I mean, not only was your career threatened, you had lots of threats put on you. Was it more than just career threats? Were they getting really nasty, or did they?
Yeah, I received an obscene phone call at my house. I received one at work, which was left on my voicemail, foolishly.
Yeah.
Because now obviously there's a recording of it. And it actually plays a significant part in a very unpredictable way later on in the book. It's very interesting how something that seemed relatively minor became relatively major for reasons no one could ever see coming. So, and not that we ever identified the caller. I don't want to mislead anyone. Sure. But when you have the opportunity to read the book, you will be surprised as to how it became an issue later on in a most unexpected way.
Can't wait to read it. That's such a great teaser. Thank you. So now there is a very well-known, I don't want to say character, a very well-known person who played a significant role in this whole process. I think just about, even if you don't follow the world of law enforcement in any way, most people know the name. Tell everybody who got involved.
Sure. So at some point after the trial, but during the injunctive hearing, the media policy became a big issue. And Mr. Bailey and his defense team had the opportunity to present expert witnesses in an attempt to justify an overreaching media policy that was enforced, best word to use it, in a convenient fashion. So it was not universally applied, but he resurrected it and dragged it out specifically to go after the inspectors so that we could not discuss what had taken place. The reason it became an issue initially was because the FBI was telling anyone who would listen that we were removed from the task force because we were incompetent, we were inefficient, we weren't pulling our weight, and we were asked to leave. So that was far from the truth.
Right.
But we were told we could not explain our side of the story, even though in the newspapers it was being played out in a very public forum. And obviously this caused us a lot of concern and anger because we were not allowed to defend ourselves while Mr. Bailey and the FBI were free to make whatever comment they felt they liked to make, to spin it in the way most favorable to them. So we end up with this hearing before the federal judge over the media policy, not only the fact that it was overreaching, but the fact that it was misapplied or applied in a punitive fashion. After they had their expert witnesses, we all met with my attorney. When I say we, several of the inspectors that were supporting me, and we were trying to figure out, we were trying to brainstorm who could we bring in as an expert witness to rebut their position. And my attorney kept saying, well, we need someone like a Frank Serpico. We need a Serpico-like witness. We need someone that is finally, Mike Malchik, he just said, well, then let's go find Frank Serpico. And like for several seconds, everyone was sort of like, wow, that's an ingenious idea. And my attorney said, I think he's in hiding. She says, you know, we're not going to be able to find him in the next couple of weeks. And Mike said, we find people for a living all the time. He says, people who don't want to be found. He says, we always find them. He says, we'll find him too. Within several days, we had him on the phone. We explained to him the circumstances, and he readily agreed to participate. He wasn't really living in hiding, but he was under the radar, let's put it that way. He was living quietly in upstate New York and was happy with that lifestyle. But he did agree. I went and picked him up and drove him back, and I got to spend some quality time with my I wouldn't say my childhood hero, but my college student hero, Frank Serpico. Yeah.
That is so cool. Yeah.
Fascinating man. It was, and I think about a month ago, Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, who was former NYPD, he awarded Frank Serpico the Medal of Valor 50 years after he was shot in the line of duty.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's incredible. So now that you've met him in person, is Pacino's portrayal accurate? Did he play him well?
Yeah, I thought it was very accurate. Yeah. Of course, it's funny when I went to go meet him, number one, I was expecting to meet Al Pacino, right? And then number two, I'm expecting to meet a person about the age of Al Pacino in the movie. And then when I finally got to meet him, this is 20 years after. Sure. You know, it was a little bit of an adjustment, but yeah, I wouldn't call him flamboyant, but I would say he's colorful. Yeah. He's engaging. He's charismatic. So cool. He's very interesting. And yeah, I was thrilled. The ride down wasn't as much fun because we were preparing for his testimony. After it was over, the ride back was nothing but fun.
Nice. Oh, what an incredible experience to have, you know, for an awful reason, but, you know, at least something really cool came out of that.
Yeah, he was very surprised. When I dropped him off, I asked him to sign his book, and I had the original first printing of his book in hardcover. Wow. And he's like, wow, he goes, I haven't seen, you know, an edition this old. He goes, in a long, long time. And I said, I've had it since college. I said, and so he wrote me a nice little message, and that's one of my prized possessions. Absolutely.
That is so amazing. What a treasure. Oh my God. Yeah. That's really, really cool. Now there's there's so many special things about this book and fascinating things. There's also something really, really sweet and special that you are doing with this book. You are donating, now help me out with this, you're donating 10% of proceeds to an organization called Shepherds. Could you tell us a little bit about this?
Right. So as a backstory, in the early 2000s, I was now working on a gang unit, and it was primarily street gangs, and it was primarily firearms and narcotics criminal activity. Worked in New Haven, worked in Waterbury, Bridgeport, Hartford, any of the cities that tend to have the bigger street gang activity. And I realized, I knew it through fugitive work, but it was reinforced through the gang work, that it seemed as if the criminal offenders were getting younger and younger. And it's troubling, to see people that are already basically career criminals by the age of 18 or 19. And I came across an article about shepherds and the work that they were doing. They started off at the Colby Cathedral High School in Bridgeport. And within a few years, they expanded to Notre Dame High School in West Haven. And that was my alma mater. So I found that a great opportunity for me to reconnect with my high school and at the same time become involved in an organization that was doing great work. So Shepherds, what it does is it provides financial assistance to a high school, to an eighth grader that would like to attend a private high school, does not have the financial resources. Oftentimes, not always, but it could be a single parent family, family with living usually in a city environment, low income. And the program is very special because not only does it provide the financial assistance, it provides the student with a mentor for their 4 years of high school. So the combination of the opportunity to attend a private high school and being matched with a mentor that is going to, in a sense, be a life coach, a guide for that student, to try to expose that student to the concept that this is a college preparatory experience and that we're hoping to see you do well enough to attend a college upon graduation. So I began with them shortly after they started in 2002. And I have since mentored 9 students. My 9th student is graduating this year. He is graduating with high honors, and he was accepted by a number of colleges. I'm bragging now, a number of colleges, including Albertus Magnus, Trinity, Colgate, and he has settled on attending Brown.
Wow.
So very, very proud of him. And I'm also now sitting on the board of directors. I've been on the board of directors for 3 years now. The organization is vibrant, it's engaging, it's positive, great people, both on the board and as our mentors, great students that we support. And yes, so I was more than happy to dedicate 10% of my profits to that organization. Yes.
That's beautiful. That just makes my heart so happy. What an incredible experience. And, just generous of yourself, of giving of yourself to help others and to give that hand up, I think is so noble and so great. So I love that.
Thanks so much.
No, thank you. So tell everyone where they can find your book, and if you're doing any appearances coming up anywhere, any book signings or anything like that, throw those out there too if you've got them.
Sure. So that you can buy the book directly from me, which I would prefer, as opposed to making Jeff Bezos wealthier. My website is thinblueliebook.com. And right from that website, you can order the book. If anyone wants it signed or dedicated, there's a way to put a notation in there, exactly what you would like written in the book. I'd be more than happy to do that before I mail it out. And it's also available for those who have Prime accounts and want to take advantage of that. Amazon, Target, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, Indie Books. It seems that a number of different places are carrying it. And I think local bookstores also may have it, at least in the Connecticut area. But I would certainly prefer you go right to the website. Another plug for the website is the fact that I have copies of all of the falsified affidavits on the website. So anyone who is that curious to see exactly what we're talking about can see the actual before and after affidavit. So oftentimes there's the true version and then the falsified version. There's also video of old news footage of the coverage during the trial. There's photographs of different characters that are in the book. Frank Serpico, Dr. Henry Lee, Governor Rowland, Richard Blumenthal, who was the Attorney General back then, John Durham, who plays a minor role in the book, and we'll be hearing more about Mr. Durham shortly, I imagine, when he comes out with his the findings of his investigation. So yeah, so there's it's layered, and the website does have a lot of bonus content.
Oh, that's amazing. What a treasure trove of stuff you've got on there. Absolutely. That's so cool. I'm so excited to get over there. I'm like a giddy kid. Like you just told me that there's a candy store that just opened up.
All types of Easter eggs over there.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, Greg, I can't thank you enough for sharing your time with me and sharing your story. It's just incredible, and it's been a huge joy to listen to this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much for having me. I appreciate that.
Thanks again for watching this show. Once again, that was Greg Dillon, and he is the author of Thin Blue Lie, An Honest Cop versus the FBI. Check it out, and we'll see you next week. Hey, family, if you're looking for the perfect gift for the reader in your life, why not check out one of my books? They're all available on Amazon and most major online book retailers, as well as Elsa